Story 1: The Vanishing Hitchhiker. It was a chilly autumn evening when John was driving down an old, deserted road. The trees on both sides of the road seemed to close in, making the night feel even darker. As he drove, his headlights caught the figure of a young woman standing by the roadside, her thumb outstretched for a ride. Feeling sorry for her, John pulled over. She looked cold, dressed only in a thin white dress. She quietly got into the car and smiled at him, but didn't say much. John tried to make conversation, but she only nodded, looking out the window. She asked him to take her to a house not far down the road, and he agreed. After a few minutes, they reached an old, run-down house. John turned to let her out, but when he looked at the passenger seat, she was gone. His heart raced. How could she have vanished without a sound? Confused, he knocked on the door of the house. An elderly woman answered, and when John told her about the girl, her face went pale. "That's my daughter," she said, "but she died in a car accident on this road, 20 years ago." Story 2: The Mysterious Gas Station. Mark had been driving for hours through a lonely stretch of highway, exhausted and just looking for a place to stop. As his gas tank inched closer to empty, he spotted an old gas station on the side of the road. It looked run down and forgotten, but he had no choice. The station was eerily quiet as Mark pulled in. There was no attendant, and the pumps looked ancient. He walked inside the small shop where an old man stood behind the counter. The man smiled and said, "Fill her up?" Mark nodded and went back to pump his gas. As he filled the tank, something didn't feel right. The whole place felt like it was frozen in time. When he finished, he walked back inside, but the shop was empty. The old man was gone, and the shelves were covered in dust, like they hadn't been touched in years. Suddenly, a trucker pulled into the station and got out. "You okay, man?" he asked Mark. "This place has been abandoned for decades." Story 3: The Stranger on the Road. Sarah was driving alone one night, heading home from a late shift at work. The road was long and empty, surrounded by nothing but fields and the occasional tree. As she drove, she noticed a figure standing on the side of the road up ahead. It was a man, waving for her to stop. Normally, she wouldn't have stopped for a stranger at night, but something about him seemed desperate. She slowed down, rolled down the window just enough to talk, and asked if he needed help. He looked terrified and begged her to give him a ride, saying his car had broken down up the road. Against her better judgment, she agreed. As he got into the passenger seat, she noticed his clothes were muddy and his hands were shaking. He kept looking behind them, as if expecting someone to follow. Sarah asked what had happened, but he only muttered something about someone coming for him. Suddenly, he shouted, "Stop the car!" Sarah slammed the brakes, and before she could ask what was wrong, he jumped out and ran into the woods, disappearing into the darkness. Shaken, Sarah drove off quickly, not wanting to find out what had scared him so badly. But as she drove away, she couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone was watching her from the shadows. Story 4: The Stranger in the Rearview Mirror. Emily had been driving for hours, eager to get home before midnight. The road was empty, and the darkness outside her car felt endless. Her headlights barely cut through the thick fog that had rolled in, making the drive feel even more eerie. She turned up the radio to keep herself company, but the sense of being completely alone on the road gave her chills. As she rounded a bend, Emily noticed a car behind her in the distance. Its headlights were faint, but growing closer. Relieved not to be alone anymore, she kept driving, glancing in her rearview mirror every now and then to check the car's distance. But something strange happened. When the car behind her got closer, she realized there was someone sitting in her own back seat. A man. His face was shadowed, but his eyes were staring directly at her through the mirror. Her heart raced as panic gripped her. Emily slammed on the brakes, her car screeching to a stop. She whipped around to look at the back seat, but no one was there. Trembling, she turned back to the road and saw the car behind her pull up alongside her. The driver, a concerned-looking woman, rolled down her window and said, "I saw him too." In your back seat. Without another word, the woman sped. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe my channel.